Well, good morning. I'm Dan DeRose. You know what that sound means. It is time for CMW, Cuyahoga's most wanted fugitives that are on our streets right now when they need to be locked up and in front of a judge to answer to charges. Everyone innocent until proven guilty. But when you're facing charges like reckless homicide, we'd rather have you in front of a judge than on our streets. We're going to welcome in, as we do every week, Detective Red Dyer with the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department. Detective, how are you this morning?
Excellent, Dan. Couldn't be better.
Hey, we've got another list of fugitives here. We've actually got 4 of them because we've got co-defendants on one case. We'll get to that. But explain first, Red, this partnership between Channel 19 and Crime Stoppers of Cuyahoga County, as well as the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department. Why does this work, and why is this so important?
Well, Dan, it's important that we involve the community to help build trust between the community and the Sheriff's Department, give the community an opportunity to help clean up their streets and potentially earn a reward, which is something we're going to get into in a little bit.
I love that. This idea that, the law enforcement that we have working our streets, they can only do so much. It's the people who live in these neighborhoods. It's the people who may know are fugitives that can place one simple anonymous phone call that gets the warrant unit in action, in motion, and we can get some of these individuals off our streets. Red, our first case does involve a reckless homicide. Some of the more serious crimes we see here on CMW are murders, homicides. Let's get to the case of Ronald Lewandowski. What do we know?
Well, Dan, like you said, this is unfortunately a reckless homicide. Ronald Lewandowski may be known on the streets as Ronald, I believe it's pronounced Hupseg. He's wanted by the Sheriff's Department for reckless homicide, as you said, and it's alleged that he conducted an unlawful drug transaction that caused the death of an individual in 2022. He failed to appear for court in February of this year, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. He actually has a criminal history, Dan, with the Sheriff's Department going back to 1995. For instance, in 2007, he pled guilty to aggravated burglary, where reports state that he forced his way into the victim's home and attacked them. Very scary situation. He's approximately 5'7" and 180 pounds and was last known to be staying in the 3000 block of East 78th Street in Cleveland.
And we want to note, a lot of people ask, and we have such a problem with drugs and people overdosing and dying. We've seen this push by the prosecutors in the state to go after when someone ODs and dies. Let's go after the person that sold it to them, who was allegedly selling these drugs, whether it's fentanyl, cocaine, whatever it is. Who made that initial deal? And that's what we're looking at in the case of Lewandowski. This is an individual alleged to have sold drugs that caused the victim to OD. Now that person has to face reckless homicide charges. And again, somebody we want off our streets. Red, let's get to our next case. What do we know about Corey Prude?
Well, Dan, Mr. Prude's wanted by the Sheriff's Department and the U.S. Marshal Service. This case stems from an incident that took place in January of this year. According to reports, Mr. Prude became angry with the victim, grabbed them by the hair, and began repeatedly punching them, causing them serious injuries. He then left the residence prior to police arrival. He failed to appear for his arraignment in February of this year, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. He has a criminal history with the Sheriff's Department dating back to 2011 to include guilty pleas to very serious charges such as assault, felonious assault, domestic violence, attempted rape, gross sexual imposition, and sexual battery. In fact, Dan, he was actually indicted yesterday for failure to register. So our sex offender registration unit, who takes the registering of these individuals very seriously, is also looking for information that leads to his arrest. He's approximately 6'1" and 199 pounds and was last known to be staying in the 8400 block of Jeffries Ave in the city of Cleveland.
I always like to remind our audience why these sex offenders are required to register. One, it's so that they can be notified in neighborhoods. People who live around them can be notified that a sex offender has moved in. But number two, where I find this most helpful for investigations in the future, if there's a crime, perhaps a sex crime happens in a neighborhood in an area, that's one of the avenues for detectives is to look up which sex offenders live in that area and see if there is maybe a pattern or somewhere that they can start their investigation. So that's very important. Unfortunately, we have yet another murder we need to talk about, fugitives, plural, that could be potentially on our street right now. We have co-defendants in a case, so let's get to Yolando Mims Jr. and Deontay Freeman.
Well, Dan, Mr. Mims Jr. and Mr. Freeman are co-defendants in a murder that occurred in Warrensville Heights. In January of this year, it's alleged that the victim went to visit Mr. Freeman and Mr. Mims Jr. at a residence in Warrensville Heights. Upon leaving the residence, both men approached the victim, who was seated in his car, and attempted to rob him. Unfortunately, the victim was shot and killed as part of this. The passenger in the vehicle also sustained non-life-threatening injuries, but still a very scary and very serious situation, Dan. Mr. Freeman has an additional warrant with the Sheriff's Department for aggravated theft, and Mr. Mims Jr. has outstanding warrants with the Summit County Sheriff's Department for receiving stolen property and Bedford Heights for attempted grand theft. Mr. Freeman is 5'5" and approximately 160 pounds, and Mr. Mims Jr. is 6 foot and approximately 245 pounds. Both men were last known to be staying in the 3400 block of East 76th Street in the city of Cleveland. So if you're in that area and you just happen to know where they are, maybe you can give Crime Stoppers a call. Help make the community a little safer and earn a reward.
Yeah, we've seen this in the past when we have co-defendants, and again, it's a reminder to our audience. It's called complicity. I know that's a word you don't hear very much, but if you are involved in the crime, you set somebody up, let's say it's the other person who pulled the trigger that caused the murder, that doesn't matter. You were there, you were helping in the commission of the crime. You too are also charged with murder. That's why we see that in that case. Obviously, the victim was shot by one of the two individuals, allegedly, but that's why they are co-defendants for the charge of murder. Red, people get nervous. They say, I don't want my name associated with this. I don't ever want some murderer to find out that I was the one who made the phone call that got them turned in. That's why Crime Stoppers is such an important tool. Why should people not fear about this whole snitches get stitches?
Well, Dan, we don't record your phone calls. We don't have caller ID. We don't exchange any personal information. All contact we have with you is referenced through an anonymous tip number. So none of your information is ever exchanged with us.
And that's why I love this program. Don't not make that call. Don't stop from making the call because you're worried your name is not going to get written down. Your name does not end up in some court file. Your name is not handed over to the warrant unit saying this is the person who made the call and said, I know where that guy lives. I know who's hiding him out. I know whose basement he's living in. I know what job he has where he's getting paid under the table. 216-252-7463 is the number, and you can earn up to a $5,000 reward. Detective Red Dyer, when we start talking about a reward, what do you like to remind our audience?
That crime doesn't pay, but Crime Stoppers does.
Absolutely does. Up to a $5,000 reward. You do not want to mess with Detective Red Dyer and that warrant unit down there for the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department. Detective, thanks for the time today. Another batch of criminals we need off our street.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, take care, Red. That's going to wrap it up for CMW, Cuyahoga's Most Wanted. It is a program that works. We've been doing this for more than a year, and we know it helps. We know people out there are making the phone call to make our streets just a little bit safer because fugitives are getting turned in. Now it's up to you. You've watched this video on social media. Share this video. Very simple. You click that share button and it gets propagated. We know how powerful social media is, and we can get some of these individuals back into a courtroom. If we have any other breaking news, it'll be right here on our digital platforms. Otherwise, our 11 o'clock news just about 15 minutes away on CW43, and then our noon news on Channel 19. Until then, I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News. Have a great afternoon.
19 News is everywhere. Download our CTV apps and follow us on social media at Cleveland 19 News.
Excellent. Red, excellent as always. I noticed I had two mistakes when I was writing these up yesterday. Apparently when I saw January of this year, my mind is still in 2023. So two of my graphics said January 2023. So I will get those changed before we go to air this afternoon.
All right, sounds great, Dan.
All right, folks. We'll see you next week.
you next week.
Take care. Have a good weekend.
Take care, you too.